Homeless teen trapped in a locked storm drain. A Hell's Angel saved him and 900 bikers changed his life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The rain had been falling over Redwood County since early afternoon, the kind of cold, steady storm that turned quiet streets into rivers of dark water. Wind pushed trash across the empty sidewalks while thunder rolled low over the hills beyond town. Most people had already gone inside for the night, lights glowing warmly behind windows while the storm soaked everything outside. Beneath the roar of rain and distant thunder, there was another sound, faint and desperate, echoing through the metal tunnels of the storm drainage system beneath the street. A pair of trembling hands pounded weakly against the heavy iron grate above. The boy inside the storm drain was 16 years old and far too thin for his age. His name was Noah Walker, and the freezing water rising around his legs was already creeping higher with every passing moment. The metal grate above him had been locked from the outside with a thick industrial chain and a heavy padlock that refused to move no matter how hard he pushed. Noah had been trapped underground for hours. At first he had screamed for help until his voice became raw and weak. Now he could only pound the grate again and again with what little strength remained in his shaking arms. Rainwater rushed through the tunnels around him, carrying leaves and mud that brushed against his soaked clothes as the storm continued to flood the drainage system. Every few seconds the water level rose just a little more. Noah tilted his head upward and shouted again, though the sound barely carried beyond the roaring rain above. Please somebody hear me. Please. But the street above the storm drain looked empty under the gray evening sky. Cars had stopped passing long ago as the storm grew worse. Streetlights flickered in the rain while water rushed along the curbs, toward the drains that fed the underground tunnel where Noah was trapped. Then something new broke through the storm. A deep mechanical rumble echoed along the empty road. The unmistakable thunder of a large motorcycle engine rolled through the rain like distant thunder. Headlights cut through the gray curtain of falling water as a large black motorcycle slowed near the flooded intersection above the storm drain. The rider wore a heavy leather jacket darkened by rain, the broad back of the vest marked with the unmistakable winged emblem of the Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club. Marcus Steele Donovan had been riding through the storm on his way back to the small garage he ran at the edge of town when he noticed something strange in the road ahead. His engine idled low as he rolled closer to the curb. At first, all he heard was rain hammering against the pavement. Then the sound came again, a weak metallic pounding rising from somewhere beneath the street. Marcus frowned and shut off the engine. The sudden silence made the storm feel even louder. For a moment he stood beside the motorcycle listening carefully through the rain. Then the faint voice drifted up through the storm drain. Please help me. Marcus Steele Donovan stood motionless beside his motorcycle as rain hammered against the asphalt around him. For a moment he wondered if he had imagined the voice, because the storm was loud enough to swallow almost any sound. Then it came again, weaker this time, but unmistakably human. Please help me. The words drifted upward through the storm drain like a ghost carried on the wind. Marcus stepped closer to the iron grate set into the flooded curb. Water rushed toward it from every direction, swirling through the narrow slots before disappearing into the underground tunnel system. He crouched down slowly, his large frame blocking part of the rain as he leaned closer to listen. Beneath the roar of rushing water, he could hear the faint sound of someone coughing. Marcus felt his chest tighten. That was no animal trapped down there. That was a kid. He pressed one gloved hand against the cold metal grate and called down through the openings. Hey, can you hear me down there? For a moment there was nothing but rushing water. Then a weak voice answered from the darkness below. Please do not leave me here. I cannot get out. Marcus looked through the narrow openings of the drain, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond a few feet. Rainwater ran down his beard as he pulled a small flashlight from the pocket of his leather vest. The beam cut through the storm as he angled it through the grate. The light revealed the inside of a concrete tunnel several feet below the street. Dirty water rushed along the narrow channel, carrying sticks and debris from the storm. and standing waist deep in the cold flood water was a teenage boy clinging to the wall of the tunnel. The kid looked exhausted. His clothes were soaked and clung to his thin frame, while his arms trembled from cold and exhaustion. Mud streaked across his face, and his dark hair hung in wet strands over frightened eyes that squinted against the sudden light. Marcus could see the fear there immediately, the kind of fear that came from believing nobody was coming to help. The boy lifted one shaking hand toward the light. "Please get me out of here. The water keeps rising." Marcus scanned the tunnel quickly. The storm drainage channel sloped downward toward the river on the far side of town, but during heavy rain the entire system filled rapidly. Marcus had lived in Redwood County long enough to know exactly what that meant. If the storm continued, the water level inside that tunnel could climb fast enough to trap anyone inside. "How long have you been down there?" Marcus asked. The boy coughed and struggled to answer through chattering teeth. "I do not know. Maybe 3 hours." "They locked the grate." Marcus froze for half a second. "They locked it." The words carried a meaning that made his jaw tighten. He stood up and looked closely at the heavy iron grate covering the drain. At first glance it looked like any normal storm drain cover installed by the city years ago. But then Marcus noticed the thick steel chain looped through the bars and secured tightly with a large industrial padlock. Someone had sealed the drain shut from the outside. Someone had made sure whoever was inside could not climb out. Marcus felt a slow burn of anger rising in his chest. He crouched again and shined the light back down toward the boy. "What is your name, kid?" The boy swallowed hard before answering. "Noah. Noah Walker." Marcus nodded slowly, even though the boy could barely see the gesture through the rain and the flashlight glare. "All right, Noah. Listen carefully to me. I am not going anywhere." Noah stared upward at the large silhouette of the biker leaning over the drain. The leather vest with the Hell's Angels emblem was impossible to miss even through the rain. For a second, uncertainty flickered across the boy's face. People on the street had always warned him about men like that. But Marcus' voice was steady and calm in a way that cut through the fear and the storm. Marcus reached down and tested the heavy chain wrapped around the grate. The padlock rattled but held firm. Whoever locked it had used equipment meant to keep the cover sealed tight. Water rushed faster through the grate now as the storm intensified, splashing across Marcus' boots while the sound of rising flood water echoed from the tunnel below. He looked down again at the terrified teenager trapped beneath the street and spoke in a voice that carried the quiet authority of a man who had spent many years dealing with hard situations. "Noah, I am going to get you out of there. Just hold on." Marcus Steele Donovan wrapped his fingers around the cold steel chain that held the storm drain shut and pulled hard once more. The metal rattled, but the padlock did not give even an inch. Rain continued pouring from the sky above, running along the street and flooding toward the drain faster with every passing minute. Water splashed against Marcus' boots while the sound of the storm echoed down into the tunnel where Noah stood trapped. Marcus leaned closer to the grate again and aimed the flashlight down into the darkness. Noah Walker was still clinging to the rough concrete wall of the drainage tunnel, his shoulders shaking from cold and exhaustion. The water had already climbed higher around his waist, and bits of debris floated past him in the narrow current. Marcus could see the boy breathing hard, fighting panic while trying to stay steady against the rushing flow. "Listen to me, Noah," Marcus said calmly through the iron bars. "I need you to stay exactly where you are and keep holding that wall. The water might keep rising, but I am going to open this grate." Noah looked up into the light, fear and hope mixing in his tired eyes. The boy nodded slowly, even though his arms were trembling. Marcus studied the padlock again. It was thick and solid, the type used on construction sites or storage yards. Whoever had locked it did not want the grate opened easily. Marcus straightened and glanced toward his motorcycle parked a few feet away in the rain. The large black touring bike looked almost like a silent animal waiting on the empty street, water streaming off the chrome surfaces while thunder rolled somewhere over the distant hills. Marcus walked quickly to the side saddlebag mounted behind the seat. He flipped open the leather flap and reached inside. Years of riding across the country had taught him always to carry tools for unexpected problems. Within seconds, he pulled out a heavy steel tire iron and a pair of thick mechanic gloves. The tools were simple but strong enough to break stubborn metal if used the right way. Marcus returned to the drain and knelt beside the grate again. He slid the tire iron between two bars of the iron cover and pushed it down toward the chain. Rainwater splashed across his arms as he adjusted the angle and braced one boot against the curb. Noah watched from below as the biker worked above him. From the tunnel floor, Marcus looked enormous, a dark silhouette framed by rain and flashing lightning overhead. The leather vest with the Hell's Angels emblem glistened with water while his broad shoulders strained against the metal bar. For the first time since being trapped in the tunnel, Noah felt something he had not felt all day. A small spark of hope. Marcus pulled hard against the tire iron. The steel chain groaned under the pressure, but still held tight. He tried again, shifting the tool slightly and using his full weight. The metal bars of the grate vibrated with a deep metallic sound that echoed down the drainage tunnel. Noah felt the vibration through the concrete wall and looked up again anxiously. The water had climbed another inch. Marcus exhaled slowly and repositioned the tire iron again. This time he wedged the tool directly against the padlock. If the lock would not open, he would simply break it apart. He braced himself once more and pushed with every ounce of strength in his arms and shoulders. For a long second, nothing happened except the rain falling harder around him. Then a sharp metallic crack cut through the storm. The padlock split open and the chain loosened instantly. Marcus tossed the broken lock aside and grabbed the heavy grate with both hands. The iron cover scraped loudly as he dragged it across the pavement and pulled it free from the drain opening. Rainwater rushed faster into the exposed hole now, but the way upward was finally clear. Marcus leaned over the opening and called down to the boy. "All right, Noah. The grate is open. I am coming down there." Marcus Steele Donovan swung his legs over the edge of the open storm drain and lowered himself carefully into the dark tunnel below the street. Cold rainwater rushed around the concrete walls as he gripped the metal ladder rungs bolted inside the drain shaft. The moment his boots touched the flood water, he felt the icy shock run through his legs. The current was stronger than it looked from above. Water surged through the tunnel toward the river several blocks away, carrying leaves, mud, and broken branches from the storm outside. Marcus lifted the flashlight again and moved slowly toward Noah Walker. The teenage boy stood several feet away, pressed against the concrete wall with both hands. His breathing was fast and uneven, and his entire body trembled from the cold. The water now reached nearly to his ribs, and the tunnel continued filling as rain poured into every storm drain across the neighborhood. When Noah saw the biker walking toward him through the rising water, his eyes widened with fear instead of relief. He stared at the large leather vest and the unmistakable Hell's Angels emblem across Marcus' back. The stories he had heard on the streets about motorcycle gangs flashed through his mind. Instinctively, Noah tried to step backward, but the concrete wall blocked him and the rushing water nearly knocked him off balance. "Do not come closer," the boy blurted out with a shaky voice. "I do not want trouble." Marcus stopped immediately a few feet away. He had seen that reaction many times before. People often saw the patches first and the person second. The biker slowly lifted both hands away from his sides to show that he meant no harm. His voice remained steady and calm even as cold water swirled around his waist. "Easy, kid. I am not here to hurt you. I am here to get you out of this tunnel." Noah shook his head nervously. His arms were wrapped around himself now, as if he was trying to protect against both the cold and the stranger standing in front of him. "People like you do not help kids like me," he whispered. Marcus watched him quietly for a moment. The boy could not have been more than 16 years old, and he looked like someone who had learned too early that trust could disappear in an instant. Marcus had known men twice that age who carried the same look in their eyes. The biker stepped a little closer, but kept his movements slow so the teenager would not panic. "Listen to me, Noah," Marcus said gently. "I know what you see when you look at this jacket. But right now the only thing that matters is the storm outside and the water rising in this tunnel." He pointed his flashlight toward the rushing current behind the boy. The water level had climbed another inch since Marcus came down the ladder. The storm was feeding the drainage system faster with every passing minute. "You stay down here much longer, and this tunnel is going to fill," Marcus continued. "And when that happens, nobody will be able to reach you." Noah followed the beam of the flashlight and saw the truth for himself. The water continued climbing slowly up the concrete wall behind him, leaving a dark, wet line that crept higher every few moments. Panic flickered across his face again. "I cannot climb out," he said quietly. "I tried before you came. The grate was locked, and the ladder is too far." Marcus nodded once. "I know. That is why I came down here. The biker took one careful step closer until he was within arm reach of the trembling teenager. His large frame blocked part of the current, making the water slightly calmer around Noah's legs. "I am going to lift you up to the ladder," Marcus explained. "From there you climb out, and I will follow behind you." Noah hesitated only a moment longer. Then the cold finally convinced him. He slowly nodded. Marcus placed one steady hand on the boy's shoulder to keep him balanced against the rushing water. "All right, kid," he said quietly. "Let us get you out of here before this storm makes things worse." Marcus Steele Donovan tightened his grip on Noah Walker's shoulder as the rushing water pressed harder against both of them. The storm outside had not slowed. Rain continued pouring into every street drain across Redwood County, and the tunnel responded like a river growing stronger with every passing minute. The water now pushed firmly against Marcus' legs, and the cold current swirled around Noah's waist with enough force to make the teenager stumble if he lost balance for even a second. Marcus adjusted his stance and planted his boots firmly against the rough concrete floor of the tunnel. "All right, Noah, listen carefully," he said in a calm, steady voice that cut through the noise of rushing water. "The ladder is right behind me, about 6 feet up the wall. I am going to lift you high enough to grab the first rung. Once you get hold of it, you keep climbing and do not stop until you reach the street." Noah turned his head toward the faint light above where the open drain shaft waited. Rain poured down through the opening like a curtain of silver lines against the darkness. The ladder rungs bolted to the inside wall looked small and far away from where he stood. His arms were shaking badly from the cold and the long hours trapped in the water. "I do not know if I am strong enough," he admitted quietly. Marcus studied him for a moment. The kid was exhausted and freezing, but he still had enough fight left to keep standing in that current. That alone told Marcus the boy was stronger than he believed. "You do not need to be strong," Marcus replied. "You just need to keep moving once you reach the ladder. I will get you there." Noah nodded slowly. The trust in his eyes was still fragile, but the fear of the rising water pushed him forward. Marcus stepped behind him and positioned both hands under the teenager's arms. The biker's strength was obvious even through the heavy rain-soaked leather vest and jacket. When Marcus lifted the boy, the movement was careful but powerful. Noah's feet left the concrete floor of the tunnel as Marcus raised him upward through the cold, rushing current. "Reach for the ladder," Marcus instructed. Noah stretched his arms upward. For a moment his fingers slipped against the wet concrete wall. Then his hand found the cold steel rung bolted into the side of the shaft. "I have it," he said breathlessly. "Good," Marcus answered. "Grab the next one and keep climbing." Noah pulled himself higher. His soaked shoes scraped against the wall as he searched for footing while the storm water rushed beneath him. The second rung came within reach, and he wrapped both hands around it. Slowly he climbed higher toward the opening where gray evening light filtered through the rain. Marcus remained below, steadying the boy's legs when the current tried to pull him sideways. Halfway up the ladder, Noah paused suddenly. His breathing had become sharp and uneven again. The cold had drained most of his strength, and the climb felt endless. Marcus looked up at him from below. "Keep going, kid," he said firmly, but with quiet encouragement. "You are almost there." Noah forced himself to move again. He climbed another rung, then another. Rainwater poured down through the open drain, soaking both of them, but the fresh air from above carried the smell of wet asphalt and distant pine trees from the hills outside town. It was the smell of freedom after hours trapped underground. Finally, Noah's hands reached the edge of the open storm drain. He pulled himself up onto the pavement and collapsed onto the wet street beside the opening. For several seconds, he simply lay there breathing hard while rain fell across his face. Below him, Marcus grabbed the ladder and climbed out of the tunnel as well. When the biker stepped onto the street, he quickly turned back and looked down into the drain one more time. The water level inside the tunnel had risen nearly another foot since they started climbing. If they had waited much longer, the current might have become too strong for Noah to escape. Marcus dragged the heavy iron grate back across the opening and set it loosely in place so nobody else could accidentally fall into the flooded tunnel. Then he turned toward the exhausted teenager lying on the rain-soaked pavement beside his motorcycle. Rain continued falling steadily across the empty street as Marcus Steele Donovan knelt beside Noah Walker. The boy was still lying on the wet pavement near the storm drain, breathing hard while the cold rain washed mud from his face and soaked the thin fabric of his clothes. His chest rose and fell quickly as his body tried to recover from the freezing water and the struggle inside the tunnel. Marcus removed one of his thick leather gloves and placed a steady hand on the teenager's shoulder. "Hey kid, stay with me," he said quietly. Noah opened his eyes slowly. For a moment, he looked confused, as if he still expected to see the dark tunnel walls around him instead of the gray sky above. The sound of rain on the pavement filled the quiet street, while thunder rolled somewhere far away beyond the hills. "You made it out," Marcus continued. "You are safe now." Noah pushed himself up slightly and sat against the curb beside the storm drain opening. His entire body trembled from the cold. "I thought I was going to drown down there," he whispered. Marcus reached up and removed his heavy leather vest. The vest carried the familiar Hell's Angels emblem across the back, but right now, it was simply the warmest piece of clothing available. He wrapped it around Noah's shoulders without saying a word. The thick leather shielded the boy from the rain and trapped some of the remaining body heat around him. Noah looked down at the vest for a moment, then glanced back at Marcus with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. People usually moved away when they saw that emblem. Instead, this man had climbed into a flooded tunnel to save him. "Thank you," the boy said quietly. Marcus nodded once, but did not answer immediately. His eyes had shifted toward the broken padlock and the length of steel chain lying near the curb where he had thrown them earlier. Rainwater ran over the metal pieces as they rested on the pavement. Someone had locked that grate deliberately. Someone had trapped a teenager in a storm drain during a heavy rainstorm. The thought settled heavily in Marcus' mind. "Who locked that grate?" Marcus finally asked. Noah pulled the leather vest tighter around his shoulders as the wind pushed colder rain across the street. His eyes moved toward the ground again. "A couple guys from the camp by the railroad tracks," he said slowly. "They were angry because I would not give them the little money I had left." Marcus listened quietly while the boy spoke. Noah explained that he had been living outside for several months after, leaving a difficult home situation in another town. Redwood County had seemed like a safer place to survive. But the group of older men who slept near the abandoned rail yard had started demanding money from younger homeless kids. When Noah refused, they chased him through the streets during the storm and forced him down into the drainage tunnel before locking the grate above him. Marcus felt his jaw tighten slightly, but his voice remained calm. "That could have killed you," he said. Noah nodded slowly. "I know." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The rain continued falling across the empty street, while water rushed along the curb and disappeared into nearby drains. Marcus looked at the teenager sitting beside him, and something in the situation stirred an old memory deep inside his mind. Years earlier, he had known someone not much older than Noah who had also been left alone to survive the streets. That story had not ended well. Marcus pushed the memory aside and focused on the present moment instead. "All right, kid," he said finally as he stood up beside his motorcycle. "You are freezing, and you need somewhere warm to dry off." Noah looked up at him cautiously. "Where would I go?" Marcus gestured toward the large black motorcycle waiting a few feet away in the rain. "I know a garage not far from here. We have heat and food there. You can warm up, and we will figure out what comes next once you stop shaking like that." Noah hesitated for a moment, but then slowly stood to his feet. For the first time since the storm began, he felt like he might actually survive the night. Marcus Steele Donovan started the engine of his large black motorcycle, and the deep rumble rolled across the empty rain-soaked street. The sound echoed against the buildings lining the quiet intersection, while water continued flowing along the gutters toward the storm drains. Noah Walker stood beside the motorcycle wrapped tightly in the heavy leather vest Marcus had given him. The oversized vest hung loosely on his thin shoulders, but it blocked the wind and rain enough to help his shaking slow down. Marcus handed him a spare helmet from the saddlebag and spoke in a calm, steady tone. "Put this on, kid. The garage is about 2 miles from here, and this storm is only getting worse." Noah hesitated for a moment. Riding with a stranger on a motorcycle was not something he had imagined happening tonight, but the cold rain and the memory of the rising water in the tunnel left him with little desire to remain alone in the street. He pulled the helmet on and climbed carefully onto the back seat behind Marcus. The leather seat was wet from the rain, but the engine beneath him radiated a faint warmth that felt almost comforting after the freezing water of the drainage tunnel. Marcus waited until the boy was steady before easing the motorcycle forward onto the empty road. The bike moved smoothly through the storm with the powerful engine cutting through the sound of rain and wind. Streetlights passed one by one as they rode through Redwood County, while thunder rolled low across the sky above the dark hills. Noah held onto the rear handles of the motorcycle and watched the quiet town slide past through the rain. He had spent months drifting through places like this, but tonight felt different. For the first time in a long while, someone had stopped and decided his life mattered enough to save. After several minutes, the motorcycle turned onto a smaller road near the edge of town, where a long brick building stood beside an empty lot. A bright light glowed above a wide garage door, and several motorcycles were parked beneath the overhang near the entrance. Marcus guided the bike into the lot and shut off the engine. The sudden quiet allowed the sound of rain hitting the metal roof to fill the air again. A tall man wearing a denim jacket stepped out from inside the garage and looked toward them with curiosity. His gray beard and calm expression gave him the appearance of someone who had spent many years working with engines and tools. "Evening, Marcus," the man called out over the rain. "Did you decide to ride straight through the storm tonight?" Marcus removed his helmet and nodded toward Noah, who climbed carefully off the back of the motorcycle. "Found this kid trapped in a storm drain downtown," Marcus explained. "Someone locked the grate and left him there during the flood." The man's eyebrows lifted in surprise as he looked at the teenager wrapped in the leather vest. "Well, that is one way to start a stormy night," he said gently. "Come inside, both of you, before you freeze out here." The garage interior was warm and brightly lit compared to the dark street outside. Rows of tools hung neatly along the walls while several motorcycles sat on repair stands across the concrete floor. The smell of motor oil and warm metal filled the air, along with the comforting sound of a heater running in the corner. Noah stepped inside, slowly unsure where to stand, but grateful for the warmth that immediately surrounded him. Marcus grabbed a clean towel from a shelf and handed it to the boy. "Dry off and sit near the heater," he said. "We will get you something warm to drink." As Noah wrapped the towel around his head, the older man with the gray beard walked closer and extended his hand with a friendly smile. "Name is Harold Murphy," he said. "Most people around here just call me Murphy." Noah shook his hand nervously. "Noah Walker," he answered quietly. Murphy glanced toward Marcus with a thoughtful look, then back at the teenager. "Well, Noah," he said kindly, "looks like you found yourself a good place to warm up tonight. And around here we do not let kids face trouble alone." The warmth inside Murphy garage slowly began to return, feeling to Noah Walker's frozen hands. The teenager sat on a wooden stool near the old metal heater while the machine hummed steadily in the corner of the shop. Steam rose faintly from his soaked clothes as the heat dried the rain and storm water that still clung to the fabric. Harold Murphy placed a large metal mug in Noah's hands. The cup contained hot cocoa that smelled rich and sweet, and the warmth spread through Noah's fingers the moment he wrapped his hands around it. "Drink slowly," Murphy said in a calm, grandfatherly voice. "Your body needs to warm up little by little." Noah nodded and took a careful sip. The heat surprised him at first, but then the sweetness settled into his chest like a small fire, pushing away the cold that had followed him out of the storm drain. Marcus Steele Donovan leaned against a workbench a few feet away with his arms folded across his chest. The large biker watched quietly while Noah drank the cocoa and warmed himself near the heater. Rain continued striking the metal roof above the garage. But inside the building, everything felt steady and safe. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The only sounds were the heater running and the distant rumble of thunder outside. Finally, Murphy pulled a rolling stool closer and sat down facing the teenager. "So Noah," he said gently, "tell us how you ended up out there tonight." Noah looked down into the mug in his hands. The hot cocoa had stopped his shaking, but the memories behind the story still made his shoulders tighten. "I was living near the railroad yard for a while," he explained slowly. "There are tents and old trailers out there where some people sleep. At first it seemed safe enough, but some of the older guys started asking everyone for money. Protection money, they called it." Marcus' eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained silent. Noah continued, speaking quietly. "I had a little money left from doing odd jobs around town, washing dishes at a diner and carrying boxes at a grocery store. When they asked for it, I told them no." Murphy sighed softly under his breath. "And they did not like that very much, did they?" Noah shook his head. "They chased me through the streets when the storm started. I tried to hide, but they caught me near the storm drains by the intersection. They pushed me down the ladder into the tunnel and locked the grate above me." He paused and swallowed before continuing. "One of them said maybe the storm would teach me not to refuse next time." The words hung in the warm garage air for several seconds. Marcus slowly pushed himself away from the workbench and walked toward the broken chain and padlock he had brought inside earlier. He placed the heavy metal pieces on the table near Murphy. Someone used a construction lock for that grate, he said quietly. That means they planned it ahead of time. Murphy studied the broken padlock and shook his head. That kind of cruelty does not belong in a town like Redwood County, he said. Noah stared down at the floor again. I thought nobody was going to hear me, he admitted softly. The rain was so loud and the water kept rising. I kept thinking maybe nobody would care if I disappeared down there. Marcus stopped beside him and rested one large hand gently on the back of the stool. Kid, he said, in a calm voice that carried quiet strength. Somebody always cares more than you think. Noah looked up at him uncertainly. Marcus nodded toward the warm garage around them. You are sitting in a place where people take care of each other. That means your story does not end in a storm drain tonight. The teenager held the warm mug a little tighter as those words settled into his mind. For the first time since he had been pushed into that tunnel, he allowed himself to believe that the worst part of the night might finally be behind him. The rain outside Murphy garage continued through the night, but inside the building the warmth and quiet slowly replaced the fear that had followed Noah Walker out of the storm drain. The teenager had changed into a set of dry clothes Murphy found in a storage locker near the office, and now he sat beside the heater wrapped in a thick work blanket. The hot cocoa had warmed him, and the color was finally returning to his face. Marcus Steele Donovan stood near the large wooden workbench, studying the broken chain and padlock again. The heavy metal pieces rested beneath the bright shop lights, and the damage from the tire iron was clearly visible along the split lock casing. Whoever had sealed that drain had not done it by accident. Murphy poured coffee into a dented metal mug and leaned against the counter beside Marcus. What are you thinking? He asked quietly. Marcus kept his eyes on the lock for a moment before answering. I am thinking that if those men are willing to throw a kid into a storm drain during a flood, then they are capable of worse things, he said. Murphy nodded slowly. The older mechanic had lived in Redwood County for more than 40 years, and he knew the quiet town did not usually see that kind of cruelty. Outside the storm was beginning to ease, but the streets were still wet and empty under the dim glow of the streetlights. Noah watched the two men from across the garage. Even though he was warm, now he still felt the lingering uneasiness that came from months of surviving alone on the streets. People rarely helped without wanting something in return. But nothing about Marcus or Murphy suggested that kind of expectation. Finally, Marcus walked toward the small office in the corner of the garage where an old telephone rested on a wooden desk. Noah looked up curiously as the biker picked up the receiver and dialed a number from memory. The line rang for several seconds before someone answered on the other end. Marcus' voice remained calm, but carried a quiet seriousness. This is Steele, he said. I need to pass along some information about a group causing trouble near the railroad yard tonight. The person on the other end spoke for a moment while Marcus listened. Noah could not hear the other voice, but he noticed the respectful tone Marcus used during the call. After a short conversation, Marcus gave a brief description of the men Noah had mentioned along with the location of the abandoned camp near the tracks. When he finished, he replaced the receiver on the hook and stepped back into the main garage. Murphy raised an eyebrow slightly. Sheriff Keller, he asked. Marcus nodded once. The sheriff and I have known each other for years, he explained. He will send a patrol car through the rail yard tonight. If those men are still there, they will be answering some questions before morning. Noah stared at him in surprise. You called the sheriff for me? He asked quietly. Marcus shrugged slightly. For the situation, kid, he corrected. Nobody gets to trap a 16-year-old in a storm drain and pretend it is just a prank. Murphy chuckled softly at that, but his eyes carried approval. The heater continued humming in the corner while the rain outside softened into a gentle drizzle. Noah looked around the garage again at the rows of tools and the motorcycles resting under bright lights. The place felt solid and safe in a way the outside world rarely did. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders and spoke hesitantly. What happens now? He asked. Murphy smiled kindly. First you finish warming up and get some real food in your stomach, he said. After that we will see about a place for you to sleep tonight that is not under a bridge or inside a drainage tunnel. Marcus leaned against the workbench again and nodded in agreement. And tomorrow, he added, we start figuring out how to make sure something like tonight never happens to you again. The storm over Redwood County slowly faded during the night, leaving the streets wet and quiet beneath a sky that was beginning to clear. Inside Murphy garage, the warmth of the heater and the steady glow of the shop lights created a calm shelter from everything that had happened only a few hours earlier. Noah Walker sat at the small wooden table near the office eating a bowl of hot soup Murphy had heated on an old portable stove. The food was simple, but after the long freezing hours inside the drainage tunnel, it tasted better than anything Noah had eaten in months. Marcus Steele Donovan leaned against the nearby workbench cleaning the rainwater from his motorcycle gloves with a shop towel. Murphy moved around the garage slowly organizing tools and occasionally glancing toward the young guest to make sure the boy was recovering from the cold. After finishing the soup, Noah lowered the spoon into the empty bowl and looked toward Marcus. The question that had been sitting quietly in his mind finally came out. "Why did you stop back there tonight?" he asked. Marcus looked up from the gloves in his hands. "What do you mean, kid?" he replied. Noah hesitated for a moment. "Most people hear something strange during a storm, and they keep walking," he explained. "Or they pretend they did not hear anything. You actually stopped and looked." Marcus studied the teenager for a few seconds before answering. "Because somebody should have stopped years ago when I needed help," he said calmly. Murphy looked over from the counter, but did not interrupt. Marcus continued speaking in a quiet, steady voice. "When I was younger, I had a friend about your age who ended up living on the streets for a while. He thought nobody cared about him either. One winter night, he disappeared during a storm a lot like this one. By the time anyone realized he was in trouble, it was too late." The garage grew silent except for the gentle hum of the heater. Noah listened carefully. "I promised myself after that night," Marcus continued, "that if I ever heard someone calling for help, I would not walk away. Tonight I heard you. That was enough." Noah lowered his eyes again, absorbing those words. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and the distant sound of a passing car moved along the highway at the edge of town. Murphy cleared his throat gently and placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "You are safe here tonight, son," he said kindly. "You can sleep in the small office upstairs. There is a couch and some blankets." Noah nodded slowly. That simple offer meant more than the men probably realized. For months, the closest thing he had known to a bed was a piece of cardboard under a bridge. Just as Murphy finished speaking, the sound of a vehicle pulling into the gravel lot outside reached the garage. Headlights flashed briefly across the shop windows before the engine shut off. Marcus walked to the door and opened it slightly. A patrol car sat beneath the dim streetlight near the entrance of the lot. Sheriff Keller stepped out of the driver's seat and approached the garage with a calm, purposeful stride. Marcus held the door open as the sheriff stepped inside, shaking rainwater from his jacket. "Evening, Steele," Keller said with a tired but friendly nod. "Murphy, good to see you again." Then his eyes moved toward Noah sitting at the table. "This must be the young man you called about." Marcus nodded once. "This is Noah Walker," he said. The sheriff removed his hat and approached the table slowly so the teenager would not feel threatened. "I hear you had quite a night," he said gently. Noah looked at the badge on the man's chest, then back at Marcus and Murphy before answering. "Yes, sir," he replied quietly. Sheriff Keller pulled a chair closer and sat down beside him. "Do not worry, son," he said in a reassuring voice. "Those men by the railroad yard are not going to be bothering you anymore tonight. My deputies already paid them a visit. And from the sound of it, they have a lot of explaining to do." Morning arrived quietly over Redwood County. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the sky washed clean and pale blue above the small town. Sunlight slowly crept across the front windows of Murphy Garage, casting long golden lines across the concrete floor where several motorcycles rested in neat rows. Inside the shop, the heater had been turned down, but the building still held the comforting warmth from the night before. Noah Walker woke slowly on the old couch in the small office above the garage floor. For a moment, he did not remember where he was. Then the events of the night returned to him in pieces. The rain, the storm drain, the rising water, the sound of Marcus' voice calling down into the darkness. Noah sat up and looked around the quiet room. A folded blanket rested beside him, and someone had placed a clean shirt on the chair nearby. Through the open doorway, he could hear the faint sounds of tools moving and voices speaking below in the garage. When Noah walked down the narrow staircase, he found Marcus Steele Donovan standing beside his motorcycle with the fuel tank open, while Harold Murphy worked at a nearby tool bench. Sheriff Keller stood near the large garage door speaking calmly, with two uniformed deputies who had just arrived. "Morning, kid," Murphy said with a friendly smile when he noticed Noah stepping into the shop. "Sleep all right?" Noah nodded slowly. "Better than I have in a long time," he answered. Sheriff Keller turned toward him and removed his hat in greeting. "Glad to hear that, son," he said. "We spent most of the night sorting things out down by the railroad yard. The men who locked that storm drain have been taken into custody. Noah's eyes widened slightly. They are in jail. One of the deputies nodded firmly. Yes, they are. Sheriff Keller rested his hands on his belt as he continued speaking. They admitted to chasing you through the streets during the storm. What they did was dangerous and reckless. The law takes that kind of behavior seriously. Marcus closed the fuel tank and stepped beside the sheriff. That is not the only reason we called you here this morning, he added. Keller nodded toward the open garage door where sunlight now filled the entrance. You might want to take a look outside, kid, he said. Noah walked slowly toward the door, not sure what the sheriff meant. When he stepped into the morning light, he stopped in complete surprise. The empty lot beside Murphy Garage was no longer empty. Rows and rows of motorcycles filled the gravel space, stretching almost to the road. Chrome handlebars and polished fuel tanks reflected the sunlight, while engines idled softly across the lot, like distant thunder waiting to roll. Bikers stood beside their machines talking quietly and drinking coffee from metal cups. Leather jackets carried familiar emblems and patches from different motorcycle chapters across the region. There were hundreds of them. Noah turned back toward Marcus with confusion written clearly across his face. What is all this, he asked. Marcus stepped outside beside him and looked across the gathering of riders. I made a few calls early this morning, he explained calmly. Word travels fast in our community when someone hears that a kid almost died alone in a storm drain. Noah stared across the enormous gathering of bikers who had arrived from towns and highways across the state. Some riders nodded respectfully toward Marcus, while others looked curiously toward the teenager standing beside him. Sheriff Keller stepped up beside them and gave a low whistle of appreciation. I counted nearly 900 motorcycles when they rolled into town this morning, he said with a small smile. Looks like you have more people on your side than you realized, son. Noah looked out across the sea of riders again, feeling something unfamiliar rising in his chest. For the first time since he had been pushed into that dark tunnel, he no longer felt alone. Noah Walker stood beside Marcus Steele Donovan at the entrance of Murphy Garage, while the morning sun continued rising above Redwood County. The sight in front of him still felt almost unreal. The gravel lot that had been empty the night before was now filled with motorcycles stretching in long shining rows across the open space. Riders leaned against their bikes or stood talking in small groups, while the low rumble of engines blended with the sound of birds returning after the storm. Leather jackets carried patches from towns and highways Noah had never even heard of. Yet every one of those riders had come because of what happened to him the night before. Marcus watched the boy quietly for a moment before placing a steady hand on his shoulder. Word spreads quickly among bikers, he said calmly, especially when someone hears that a kid nearly died alone during a storm. Noah looked across the crowd again and noticed several riders beginning to walk toward the garage. Their expressions were not threatening or cold as he once imagined bikers might look. Instead, many of them nodded respectfully when they saw Marcus standing beside the teenager. A tall woman with silver hair braided down her back approached first. She wore a leather vest similar to Marcus, but with patches from another state across the country. She stopped a few feet away and looked directly at Noah with kind, steady eyes. So this is the young man Steele pulled out of that storm drain, she said warmly. Marcus nodded once. This is Noah Walker, he replied. The woman smiled and extended her hand toward the teenager. Name is Diane, but most folks on the road call me Silver. Heard about what happened and decided to ride through the night to get here. Noah hesitated only a second before shaking her hand. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Silver glanced across the rows of motorcycles behind her. You see all those riders out there, she asked. Every one of them heard the same story and made the same decision. Nobody wanted a kid thinking the world forgot about him. Behind her, more bikers gathered near the garage entrance. Some carried bags while others brought small boxes from their saddlebags. Murphy stepped outside and looked across the growing group with a curious expression. Looks like you brought half the highway with you, Silver, he said with a laugh. The woman shrugged lightly. When riders heard that 900 bikes might be needed, they did not argue, she answered. One by one, the bikers began placing the items they carried onto a long wooden table Murphy rolled out of the garage. There were warm jackets folded neatly beside new boots and backpacks filled with basic supplies. Another rider placed a small envelope on the table, and several others added their own beside it. Noah watched in confusion as the pile slowly grew larger. Marcus leaned closer and explained quietly. Riders take care of their own, he said. And sometimes that circle gets bigger than people expect. Silver opened one of the envelopes and handed it to Murphy, who counted the money briefly before nodding in approval. "Looks like we have enough here to help the kid get started again," he announced. Noah stared at the envelopes and clothing spread across the table. "You do not have to do this," he said nervously. Silver turned toward him and smiled gently. "Maybe we do," she replied. "Because last night the storm almost took something from this world that still deserves a chance to grow." Sheriff Keller stepped out beside them and looked across the gathering crowd of riders with an approving nod. "I have seen many strange mornings in this town," he said slowly. "But I have never seen 900 motorcycles show up just to help one kid." Marcus looked down at Noah with the faintest hint of a smile. "Sometimes it only takes one moment for people to remember what kind of world they want to live in," he said. The gathering outside Murphy Garage lasted through most of the morning. Sunlight continued spreading across Redwood County while the long rows of motorcycles glimmered beneath the clear sky that had followed the storm. Riders stood beside their machines, sharing coffee and quiet conversation, while Noah Walker slowly began to understand what had happened. The night before he had been alone in a flooded tunnel with rising water and no reason to believe anyone would come. Now he stood in the middle of a crowd of people who had crossed highways and counties simply because they heard that a young life almost ended in the dark. Harold Murphy finished organizing the items on the long wooden table and waved Noah closer. The teenager walked toward him, still unsure how to respond to everything unfolding around him. Murphy placed a sturdy backpack in Noah's hands first. Inside were clean clothes, a warm jacket, and several everyday supplies that would help someone starting over. Next, Murphy handed him a small envelope that held part of the money the riders had gathered together that morning. "This is not charity," Murphy explained gently. "Think of it as fuel for the road ahead. Everyone needs a little help getting moving again sometimes." Noah looked down at the backpack and the envelope as if they might disappear if he blinked. "I do not know how to thank all of you," he said quietly. Marcus Steele Donovan stepped forward and rested his hand on the boy's shoulder once more. "You do not need to repay anyone here," he replied. "Just make sure that when you see someone else in trouble someday, you remember how this moment felt." Sheriff Keller nodded in agreement from beside the garage door. "Redwood County has a small youth program that helps teenagers find work and a safe place to stay," he added. "After hearing your story, this morning the town council agreed to help get you into that program. You will have a place to sleep and a chance to finish school if that is what you want." Noah lifted his eyes in surprise. "A real place to stay?" he asked softly. Keller smiled. "A real place," he confirmed. The morning slowly moved toward midday as the riders prepared to continue their journeys. One by one, engines started across the gravel lot, and the deep rumble of motorcycles rolled across the quiet town like distant thunder. Before leaving, many of the riders stopped beside Noah to shake his hand or offer a few words of encouragement for the road ahead. Silver placed a gentle hand on his shoulder before climbing onto her own motorcycle. "Remember what you saw here today," she told him. "There are more good roads in this world than bad ones." When the final group of riders prepared to depart, Marcus stood beside Noah at the edge of the lot. The teenager watched the long line of motorcycles begin to roll toward the highway in a shining parade of chrome and leather. Nearly 900 riders had arrived that morning, and now they disappeared slowly down the road one after another. The rumble of engines faded until the town returned to its usual quiet rhythm. Noah looked at Marcus and then at Murphy and Sheriff Keller standing nearby. "Yesterday, I thought the world forgot about me," he admitted. Marcus shook his head gently. "The world did not forget you, kid," he said. "It was just waiting for the right moment to remind you that you are not alone." Noah stood there a little longer, holding the backpack that would carry the first pieces of his new beginning. The storm drained, and the dark water felt far away now. In their place stood a small town, a warm garage, and the memory of 900 riders who showed him that sometimes a single act of kindness can change the direction of an entire life.